Okay, so before we answer the research question, which is right there, we first need to answer the question, what are catapults? Catapults are essentially siege weapons greatly relying on its design and various forces to launch projectiles over considerable distances, striking at either weak foot soldiers and buildings or numerous sturdy and overwhelming structures. Though it is outclassed by the militaries of today, these machines were undoubtedly praised and recognized as fearsome pieces of artillery on the battlefield. In total, there are 3 types of catapults: tension, torsion, and trebuchet catapults. Not those like mangonel, ballista. No, this is my list! Let's start off with the tension catapults, since they're heralded as being one of the first siege weapons to be ever created. Loaded with bolts, they would completely revolutionize ancient warfare, introducing a new way to devastatingly wage war upon opposing nations. Most notably, the oxybells, basically a giant crossbow on a wooden tripod, would be created in 375 BCE, the largest of which boasted an impressive range. As its type suggests, the way it worked was quite simple, as it would utilize the bow's tension to fire the missile. Being one of the first of its kind, these types of catapults were of course burdensome to load and fire, but they would lay the groundwork for future complicated catapult developments, like the torsion catapults. As the Greeks would continue to modify their catapult creations, torsion catapults would surface, making improvements to their overall power and range. Evidently, the ballista, basically a slanted giant crossbow on a wooden tripod, would lay its claim amongst Roman armies, setting the standard for effective catapults. Instead of using tension, torsion catapults relied on the torsion from tightly strung coils of rope called rope bundles, having an arm stuck through their middles. Using winches, the arm of the catapult would be pulled down by a hook, having an additional piece of string called the trigger rope. Once the trigger rope is pulled from a safe distance, the catapult fires, influenced by the torsion from the rope bundles and therefore resetting the cycle for another round. These catapults would mark the era where educated personnel knowledgeable about the various concepts of physics and mathematics would be needed to operate these types of machinery, as the typical soldier could not easily account for the angles of elevation of the catapult and the ammunition's weight, and etc. etc. Now finally, let's move on with the big boys! We got the trebuchets! Now there's 2 types of trebuchets, the traction one and the counterweight one, so let's move on with the traction one first. Arriving from China and the Middle East at about 1100 CE, traction trebuchets were equipped with several ropes, utilizing manpower and traction to hurl its projectiles. Generally, these trebuchets had an incredible rate of fire, as the pullers pulling the ropes to launch a projectile could apply and remove their forces upon the catapult almost instantly, allowing the arm to rapidly return back to its starting position to be loaded once again. These catapults did have some drawbacks, however. As this siege weapon was ultimately dependent on its men pulling the ropes, heavier projectiles could not be launched, as greater missiles needed greater amounts of soldiers. Its accuracy would also vary, depending on the amount of fatigue its pullers had suffered and the amount of force they enacted upon the machine. This would lead to traction trebuchets being mainly used to decimate enemy troops or more delicate buildings. Counterweight trebuchets were practically the opposite of traction trebuchets, using the counterbalance and the force of gravity to launch its projectiles. Not needing any pullers to launch its load, counterweight trebuchets were especially specialized in destroying stronger structures, simply requiring a heavier counterbalance for heavier projectiles. Ergo, these sorts of trebuchets are quite large and were greatly difficult to assemble and disassemble compared to traction trebuchets. Furthermore, these trebuchets had a gradual rate of fire, as its throwing arm would typically continue to swing in a pendular motion, influenced by its counterweight still having some potential energy. So, regarding the research question, there are different types of catapults, as people will continuously strive to ensure their siege weapons were better than their predecessors, generating each type with their own advantages/disadvantages. War is a competitive environment, and in order to remain at the top, you needed to innovate and get ahead of the crowd. Take a look at the tension catapult, for example. Although it was revolutionary and introduced a new weapon into siege warfare, it was simply not good enough, lacking in power, range, and effective way to deal with enemies behind their fortifications. As a result, torsion catapults entered into the fray, considerably improving upon the range and power of catapults by altering its design and energy source, producing catapults like the mangonel and the ballista. However, they would increasingly see less usage on the battlefield, as a trebuchet would barge into it. Despite requiring more trained personnel to operate the machine, they made up for it in power and brought 3 new advantages to the table: their ability to lob payloads over walls, their versatility in ammunition, and their resistance to bad weather. Because of all this, the trebuchet would become widely used within European nations until something better than the trebuchet would arrive into the hellish environment of war. Basically, there are different types of catapults because innovators, engineers, and thinkers throughout the years would discover new types of catapults that were better than the last, simply altering the way a catapult was designed to suit their objectives and compete in the ultimate game of warfare.